Hey guys, Jason here. If you own a Marshall Reissue amp 2203X, 1987X, or the JTM45 and so on, you might find that the effects loop in these amps is a little bit of a tone sucker, right? It's one of these. This is your stock Marshall Reissue effects loop. It runs on a low voltage 30 volt DC supply, and look, it's a bit of a tone sucker, right, as you'll find in this video. So I'm really excited to announce a new replacement effects loop that I have designed a PCB for. This is your standard high voltage LND 150 zero loss effects loop as used by the Metro Loop, Friedman, Stereotone, so on. Many amps, right? This was originally designed by Stephen Miller, the circuit. And what I've done is to design a PCB that is a bang-on drop-in replacement, right? So in this clip, we're going to do a tone test of the stock loop versus the high voltage loop. This one runs on 300 volts DC. Right, I'm going to show you how to install one of these into your Marshall. I'm going to do it in a 2203X, right, the Reissue JCM 800. And these are now available for purchase in the online store. I'm also really excited to announce a collaboration that's been ongoing for a little while. Monomyth amps in the US, which I'm sure many of you have heard of. He's going to make these available in the US, right? So we put these together. If you're out of the US, you'll have one of these assembled by myself and I'll ship it. If you're in the US and you order from the online store, these will be made by Shea and shipped locally, right? So you won't have to wait for these things to come from Australia. Okay, so what this is a zoomed in piece of the 2203X Reissue schematic. I just want to show you where the loop is inserted here, right? So this is your tone stack, okay? Treble, bass and mid pots. And off the treble wiper, that's the middle lug, we go to the master volume, right? So this is the master volume on your 2203, and out of the master volume wiper it goes off. See this W4, that's the entry to the effects loop. See, it says 2 effects, right? And then the output of the effects loop is W3 as notated on the effects loop PCB, and then we come in through this coupling cap here into the entry to the phase inverter. Okay, so this is pretty normal for an effects loop. The one thing I will comment on with respect to the stock Marshall setup, which we will change when we install the Headfirst Loop, is the send level is actually dependent on your volume, right? So your master volume on your amp is actually setting the send level to your loop. Okay, we want to change that. And we change it like this. So just bear with me here. I've just kind of, crudely marked up the standard Marshall scheme here. But what we're going to do is we're going to feed the loop straight from the treble wiper, right? So straight from the treble wiper to W4 into the loop, and then out of the loop, W3 is this one here. So out of W3, we then feed the master volume, and then the master volume wiper or output is straight into the phase inverter. The reason we do this is you get a very consistent send level, right? So, bear in mind that the replacement effects loop and the Marshall loop, for that matter, is both instrument level and line level, right? So it can do minus 10 dB and plus 4 dB. This way, you get a very, very consistent send level. Okay, so a nice hot signal going into your loop and a nice hot signal going out, or a nice buffered signal going out to your pedals or whatever it is that you might have in the effects loop. And then, decent signal to noise ratio back in, and it's only the master volume after the loop that we're setting the overall volume in to the amp. Okay, so to replace the stock loop with your new high voltage zero loss effects loop, first thing you're going to do, right, is just pull this off. So you just unscrew, this will come out really easily, right? So just unscrew the jack inputs from the send and return on your loop. It's the only thing that's holding it in. Okay, the loop will come out like this. Bear in mind that these jack sockets have these little spaces on them, right? So make sure you don't need them, but because your new loop will have a new set there. You do want to reuse these caps, right? So to retain a complete stock look, these black end caps here on these push-in switches, right? You'll just pull these off. They'll just clip off. You just pull them and they'll come off, and put them back on to your new replacement loop. So from the outside, it'll look completely stock. And here's our replacement loop. Like you can see that this guy is sized to be an exact drop-in replacement. All right, so when you buy the board, it'll come like this, but without the end caps. As I said, you leave those off and you reuse the end caps that you have on your stock loop. Then you'll get a completely stock look from the outside. And if I just move this out of the way, you'll see, right? I'll just rough this in. You see, it's just a very easy drop-in replacement like that, right? And then you screw the jack inputs back in on the outside of the chassis here, and it'll be securely mounted in. Obviously, to do this properly, right, we're going to pull this out and we're going to solder this new one in. And just noting, guys, with the replacement board, that the locations, right, for this is the ground, this is the high voltage supply, and the in and the out of the loop, they're all exactly in the same place, right, and even labeled the same: W2, W1, W3, W4. So to install this new loop, all I need to do is unsolder these existing wires, right, and place them effectively on the same place in here. And then I have to reconfigure the audio path to some degree. You can see here that we're coming from the treble wiper here, and we go straight across to the master volume. And then from the master volume wiper, which is the output of the master volume, this black wire comes in here to the input of the loop. And then the output of the loop, which is the brown wire, comes over to here and is the input to the phase inverter. So with these high voltage loops, what you actually want
is you want to come off the treble wiper into the loop, out of the loop to the input of the master volume, and then from the master volume wiper to the phase inverter. So we're going to reconfigure this just a little bit. Let's have a look at how I've connected this up. Okay, existing ground has gone to W2. Existing high voltage supply has gone to W1. Reconfigured this slightly, as I said, right? Let's trace it through. The existing black wire has gone to W4. This is the input to the loop. The black wire, which was on the master wiper, has been moved across to the treble, right? The wiper of the treble pot. So your signal makes its way through the tone stack. Out of the tone stack, black wire into the loop, right? And then this new wire, which I'm just running across the top here, the blue wire, it's in W3 and it's going into the input of the master volume. And the brown wire, which was on W3 on the old loop, which would then take us into the input to the phase inverter, which is this one here. I poked that under the board and I'm running that from the wiper of the master volume. I want to show you a few voltage readings here, right? So on this side of that big 10 watt resistor, this is your screen supply node. It should be about 450 volts DC, right? Be careful when you measure these voltages. On this side of it, you'll have about 380, right? So you're getting the voltage drop. Now that 380 is the voltage that's been fed to the loop. And then R8, we want to populate this with another 47k resistor. This is a 2 watt 47k resistor. It will become populated with the board, right? So when you buy this board, or if you buy this board, become fully populated, we'll put a 47k resistor in there, and in a stock Reissue amp, I've got 312 volts at that point, right? That is the actual voltage, the high voltage that is used by the loop, which is right on spec, right? You want about kind of 290 to 310 on these loops. So, you know, we're on 311 here, 312, which is absolutely fine. So when you complete the install, these are the things to check, right? If you're getting a voltage drop across R8, right, from one side, 380, to the other side, 311, 312, that means the loop is drawing current, which means it's working, right? If your voltage reading on either side of this resistor is the same, you've got a problem. First thing I would check, make sure you're grounded the loop. If you don't ground it, you'll get no current draw across that resistor, and the voltage reading will be the same on either side. Now this is all ready to go, right? I've checked the voltages, I've set the level with the trim pot, so the level's the same when the loop is in or out. We're done. So let's go through how I would do this with shielded coax, right, which I do recommend. It is the preferred way. As I just showed, you can use the standard Marshall wiring that's already supplied. It'll be fine, right? But if you really want to go that extra mile, then I do suggest using some thin shielded coax just like this, which we will supply with the loop. Okay, so feel free to use it. Now remember, we're changing the configuration here with respect to the standard Marshall circuit. Standard Marshall circuit goes from the treble wiper to the master volume wiper or output to the loop, from the loop into the phase inverter. We're reconfiguring this to go treble wiper to loop, out of the loop to the master volume, and the master volume output or wiper to the phase inverter. And you can see this is a modded 2203, right? So just ignore all of that. But you can see my master volume wiper here, the output is straight into the phase inverter. I use shielded coax here. You don't have to, but you know, why not? So let me show you how I do this, right? So when you're using shielded coax, you only want to ground it at one end. Okay, so if you're going to run from the treble wiper to the loop, we're going to have a run like this. We're going to connect it here, no ground at one end, but ground at the other. Okay, so when you're doing this, you've got to look for a convenient ground. Now, on the loop board, I've actually included a ground pad right here. So W4 is the input to the loop, W3 is the output. This is a ground pad, and we're going to use that to ground one end of this coax. If you ground one end of your shield on your coax, right, you will have completely noise-free runs in your amp. So let me show you how I do it. Right, so the first end, which is we're not going to have a ground shield on, I strip it a bit shorter. You pull the shield off, and you can use this technique, right, in all your amp building. I mean, just do this all the time, right? Cut that off, right? Get rid of the shield completely with your cutters, and all you're left with is the core, right? Get your strippers, cut off an end like that. Right, the very next thing I do is I tin the end of that, solder, right, I don't want it fraying all over the place. The very next thing I always do is I get a little bit of heat shrink, right, like that, just a short length, and we're going to throw that on there, about like that, right? And then I'm going to get my heat gun, okay. What we've got here is a nice tidy end of coax, right? So the heat shrink, what that does is prevent the shield from getting anywhere, right? Because you build a few amps, you'll soon run into trouble where you've got frayed ends of a shield that's grounded, and it'll stop your amp from working because it'll ground a signal wire. Okay. So there's our treble wiper, and this is going to go right into the input of the loop, which is W4. So I want it to go about yay long. Okay, so cut. Let's have a look at, yeah, cut there. Okay, now for the other end of the coax, you want to cut it, you want to strip it with more length, right? So the first one I was probably about there. This one you want longer, and the reason you want longer is because you need more of this shield to work with, because this is where we're going to ground it, and I'm going to want a longer piece of that. So I pull it away from the signal wire, I twist it, making sure that there's kind of no loose strands floating around, at least nothing too bad. Get my cutters, get my wire strippers again. Right, expose the end of it. Now, here's my solder, and I'm going to do same thing as before, and I'm going to tin the end of that, and I'm also doing it on the shield so that it doesn't kind of fray everywhere. And we're going to do the same thing. Heat shrink, small piece. I just cut it off my reel that I've got here. I'm going to throw this on. Okay. And the purpose of this heat shrink really is to, so if there's any kind of stray, loose fraying, as there is, right, you can see, I can see them. That just kind of stops them from getting in harm's way, because that's going to be grounded. And as I said, if that touches your signal wire, your amp will not work. Okay, so triple wiper goes into W4, which is right here, and you can see right next to it, I've conveniently left a ground pad. Right, so that gives me an option to ground one end of this coax, right? So I solder these in. W3 goes back to the input on the master volume, where I will do the same thing, right? Ground that just at one end. I'll ground it at the PCB here and run it straight to the master volume in. Okay guys, here's the install with the coax, right? So the loop is in. You can see the way the Marshall loops go, they go upside down. And we've reconfigured this, right, compared to the stock. So triple wiper, coax to W4, grounded at one end here on the ground pad. W3 is the out of the loop, it's this one here, it's coming into the master volume input, right? And then from the master volume wiper, we're into the phase inverter input, which in the stock Marshall is that brown wire right there. Okay guys, well I hope you agree that the high voltage loop is certainly an improvement on the stock Marshall. If you're up for a very simple mod, I recommend getting one of these and throwing it in your amp. You'll find it's a big improvement. Catch you later.